All right, folks. First off, I'm just gonna say, got this mic over here still. I tried using it last time. The sound was no better with the mic. I need a better video capture program. The one that comes with my webcam does not have the ability to select the input, which is an incredibly lame program made by Microsoft. So screw you, Microsoft, for not making a better webcam program. But enough about that. So eventually I will move back to the microphone, but only after I find a better camera capture software. And I don't really want to do that yet, so we're just going to move back to the old webcam mic and webcam. Let's just get right into it here. It was just a shellacking. It was a shellacking. And I got to own up to it. I was wrong. I was very wrong. My pregame, I was saying, no way the Patriots cover a 13.5-point spread. I'd say they covered it by almost 3 times. Not quite, but, surprising to me. I was not expecting that kind of an outburst. Shows good coaching. They punched the Jets right in the mouth from the beginning, as they said, as the old saying goes, and the Jets quickly decided this was not going to be a spoiler game and laid down and died. Promptly laid down and died. I guess I knew the Jets weren't great this year, but the level to which they offered no challenge today was shocking. Shocking, I think Drake May said something about how this game was easier than some of his high school games or something like that, just a pathetic performance from the Jets, who I don't think had any reason to want to win, except for maybe to preserve Aaron Glenn's head coaching tenure, because it might be that, I know that they want to pick, but you don't need to lose 41-10, 42-10. That's pathetic. Anyway, first I just want to say I'm on this channel. I'm going to openly admit when I'm wrong. A lot of other channels, I watch. I don't know why I watch Colin Cowherd. I think it's funny. I think we like to watch these opinionated guys because we think they come across as so sure of themselves that we believe that somehow they know something. It's amazing how confidence in what you're saying can lead to trust, even when what you're saying is total crap. And I've heard Colin Cowherd have some takes that are just blatantly wrong. And the very next show, he's proven wrong, and he doesn't even acknowledge the fact that he just totally was 100% off base. And I don't know, that seems to work for him. He still has a show. I don't know if that's just because he was on ESPN to begin with, or because of connections, or, because of his production values, or what. But I'm just going to tell you right now, if I'm wrong, I'm going to tell you when I'm wrong, I'm not going to try to pretend, like a lot of these guys, that I'm some expert that knows everything, and that, you're coming to me for some kind of genius take, I didn't even play organized football. Like I said, I don't know if you in my first video, I was almost recruited to my high school football team. It didn't happen. Basically they wanted me on the team, but I didn't have, since I had summer school the year they recruited me. I would have to get up at like 4 in the morning to get to practices by 5 in the morning, and I wasn't having any of that. So that I had one practice with the football team, which was entertaining. They did one weightlifting session where they absolutely brutally killed me. And I had never lifted weights at that point, and after one session, I remember the next day I couldn't even get up the stairs. And I did one practice with the team where a linebacker on the defense picked me up and body slammed me. And he was actually probably being gentle because it didn't hurt. I remember he slammed me right on my back, and it didn't hurt at all. But I was shocked that anybody was big enough. I was 6'3", probably at that point. I was out of shape, so I was like 330 pounds. Almost this dude just picked me up like I was a rag doll, tossed me into the ground. I wasn't in any kind of shape to do the drills. They had us do burpees. They had us do other kinds of athletic moves, and then that I was no good at. Of course, it was my first day, so who knows? I maybe would have gotten good at it. And then we played a little bit of kind of scrimmage practice, which was the most fun part of it. I did get a block. I think they were going to make me a right tackle. It seemed like I was on the right side of the line. I remember that, on the far right side of the line. And I remember I got beat by my guy on one play, and then the next play I got a block, and the running back, um, you know, moved for some yards. I mean, I think they were showing me plays. I didn't even know what the hell I was looking at. It was confusing. It was only a couple plays, and I think it was a very short scrimmage. It was just a couple plays, and then they called. I think they just wanted to see where I was at and see whether I was capable or not. It could have continued. Might have been fun, but I probably would have gotten severely injured. I don't think I'm really tough enough for football, particularly for real football. I'm not to play through some of these injuries these guys play with. Absolutely insane. But anyway, enough of that. My aside of my football pasts. Basically, I'm just trying to tell you what my football past is minimal. I'm no kind of expert on this stuff, but I am a fan, like you. I have, I think, some amount of intuition that sometimes is right. It's not always going to be right. I'm probably about as accurate as these guys who have spent time in the league and played. Maybe if you're John Gruden, you know a lot more about football than I do. But I think you can learn a lot. You can get a lot through intuition if you're fairly intelligent. I think I know a little bit about football. I don't know ball, and they say you don't know ball or you do know ball or whatever. I don't know ball like some of the guys that have obviously played and are master strategists, guys who've been former coaches, things like that. But I can draw basic conclusions, and as a fan, you really hear more to you're listening to me because we're both fans. These other guys, Colin Cowherd, he's not a fan of any team. The dude's freaking, he's doing it for the money. Most of these guys you see on the internet, they might have a team that they sort of root for, but they're doing it for the money. I'm doing it for the love of the game, or sorry, for the love of the Patriots specifically, to be more. So I'm not going to be afraid to admit when I'm wrong, and I was damn wrong. I was wrong about a lot of games this weekend, and I'll get to that in my league review. I really did thought the Patriots would struggle with being down so many guys, and no struggle at all. It's hard to believe that this is the same team that that in their first matchup with the Jets, the game kind of went down to the wire a little bit. I think it was like the Jets' last possession the game ended on. This was just I usually love games like these. You want to talk about me being a fan. I'm a fan when I'm willing to admit that these games like these are. I'd rather see the Pats boat race somebody than have to play a game to the end. Um, you know, I think if it was all games were like that, I'm kind of reminded of that Twilight Zone episode. If you've never seen the Twilight Zone, there's an episode where a guy he goes to what he thinks is heaven. He's a gambler, degenerate gambler, and he goes around, and every time he places money on a bet, he wins. He just keeps. And at first, he thinks it's great, and he wins and wins and wins, and then he realizes, oh my God, wait a second, I can't lose. All the fun's taken out of it. And he realizes he's in hell. And the real, I hate to give it away. That's a spoiler alert. A little late for that, but um, he comes to realize that this is his gambler's hell because he can't possibly lose, and all the fun's taken out of it. So that's how I'd feel if every Pats game was a huge blowout. I mean, the closest we came to that as in recent Pats history was obviously 2007 when the team was just when they were pissed and rolling up the score on every single game. And as a fan, I absolutely loved it. I loved 2007. It was exciting. So many pieces, Tom Brady throwing to the most talented core of receivers they ever had. The defense was always a problem all year that year, but it didn't matter because they were scoring so much that it wasn't going to be an issue. And I think on some level, I thought maybe the Giants' pass rush could be our kryptonite, because we knew Brady struggled with good pass rush, but you still thought the way they were beating teams that year undefeated, it just seemed like we were unstoppable. And yeah, we all know how that ended. So in some ways, maybe it's a good thing. I hate to say that. It's like maybe no fan deserves a perfect season. Um, I mean, at the same time, the Bulls fans got to watch their team go 72-10 and then win a championship. So, whereas the Warriors fans had to see their team go 73-9 and lose the championship. So really, when you have a great year like that, it's like the Patriots did in 2007, where they win everything and then lose the most important game of the year. It's bittersweet as hell. There's no question about it. But you know, I love watching a blowout. On some level, people could say, well, you just want to feel like a winner. You don't lift a finger. You sit on the couch and you watch the team, blow out somebody else, and you feel like you're somehow part of the team. Well, the reality of the matter is, Dave Portnoy has commented on this. I'm going to comment on this now. Dave Portnoy unapologetically says, we are part of the team. We are part of the Patriots. And you know what? He's right. And I'll tell you why. Because without us, the fans, the team wouldn't exist. It would have no reason for being if we weren't there rooting for it, buying their stuff, going to games. I still haven't even been to a Pats game. I was planning on going this year. I did not find myself in a financial position to be able to afford it, unfortunately. I've only been to one football game in my life. It was Giants-Raiders when both teams were totally irrelevant, and it was a shitty game, and I spent most of the time looking at the Raiderettes. Still, we had good seats for that game because a friend of mine had gotten good seats. But that's the only game I've ever been to. I'd love to go to Foxborough someday. It is going to happen. If it ever does, I'll let you know. But a lot of people take umbrage when people like me say we when talking about the Patriots, or when we sort of relate to the team when they win. Obviously, I didn't go out there, throw a pass, catch a pass. I didn't even, the team, as far as I was as they were concerned, I didn't even exist today. But we fans are the reasons why the whole thing happens. So don't act as if we're not important. We are important. The team wouldn't exist without the fans, and that's all there is to it. All right. So with that, a little bit of general philosophy. Let's get back to a little bit of the game analysis. There's not much to analyze here. The best play of the game is obviously the Diggs catch on the sideline, and on a tough throw. Dre got flushed out, and on the run throws a ball, while he's running sideways, that is in the absolute perfect spot. And Diggs goes up, makes a catch with his hands basically behind the defender's one head, grabs the ball and gets 2 feet down. Absolutely incredible play. Diggs earned an extra $500,000 on a touchdown later in the game. It's as someone who could probably live off of $500,000 for the rest of his life. I never want to say anyone deserves $500,000, but if anyone in the NFL does deserve $500,000 for anything, it'll be for the year that Diggs has had. I want him to get his money because you as a Pats fan, he's brought us joy. He's brought us a lot of joy this year. I don't like the fur coat Diggs, though. I gotta say, I'm sorry. I'm not like I'm generally an animal activist. I wish he wasn't doing the fur coat. It's coyotes. There's lots of coyotes out there. I think it's kind of a shame. I'm gonna tisk him for the fur coat, but whatever. I shouldn't even mention it, really. He's still a badass. He gets paid for doing a great job, and there's plenty of coyotes in the world, even though I don't like to see anything suffer. All right. Otherwise, there's really not much to talk about in this game. The offensive line looked really good. I don't remember. I think Drake might have been sacked once. It was kind of a rough sack, so it was a little scary. But he might have been. I don't know if he was sacked more than once. The offensive line was plenty good. It didn't seem like it was really an issue because Drake May was the coverage was so bad that Drake May was getting the ball out extremely quick. Ramondre also very balanced attack early on. Ramondre running great. The Ramondre Travion combo. There was a lot of this year where we only got to see just Travion because Ramondre had the fumbling issues, and then he was out with the toe injury, and it was almost like, plus it was Antonio Gibson more earlier in the year with Ramondre, so it kind of has taken a while for this Ramondre-Travion duo to emerge, but, I think they have complementary styles of running, which is pretty great. Ramondre is more of a smash mouth in your face kind of get the yards up the middle guy, and then Travion, he's got a lot of power also. Doesn't do as much dodging or doesn't keep the legs moving quite the same way as Ramondre, but if he finds a hole, watch out. The dude could be gone. I like the two running back attack, and today there was some really good holes made by the offensive line, which is surprising considering that Jared Wilson and Will Campbell are still out. I think it seems like running to the right side is where we're going to have most of our success. I hope they continue to do that. As good as Jared Wilson and Will Campbell have been as rookies, I don't know if they still quite have their run blocking down, but we'll see. But I think that made it really hard for the Jets early on. Was that the running game was pretty successful early on, which sort of made the passing game more successful early on, and really just took a lot of wide open guys. Very creative in the guys they went to. They went to Austin Hooper. I knew he would be more involved. Hunter Henry, Diggs, and then we got to see the emergence of Efton Chisholm III. Can you imagine being a line of three different generations named Efton Chisholm? It's like there's a lot of I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like that last name, it's I don't know. I guess Efton kind of takes your mind off the fact that the last name sounds like a mission from. I'm not going to even just go into detail. We all know. I mean, it makes for great comedy. I had a lot of good preseason jokes. There'll be more Efton Chisholm jokes in the future. But all I can say is, he's a slippery devil. That Chisholm is really slips his way in between everything. All right, that's a pretty lame attempt. I didn't prepare anything, obviously. But you're going to hear more jokes like that, better ones, hopefully. But really, though, seeing him get his first two big receptions, I mean, he looked good on those plays. It was just a couple of receptions, that one in the middle of the field, pretty big chunk of yards there. And perfect throw from May. He kind of did the Pop Douglas stumble around and fall move, which is kind of, I don't know why that happens with certain guys. But it was no big deal. It was such a big chunk of yards that it didn't matter at the time. And then he had the beautiful touchdown in the end zone, where reminded me of that play in Tampa Bay where Drake May got picked off. Similar type of situation. He's behind the defender, and May is rolling to his right, but it wasn't quite his last second of a throw, and this time, I think Chisholm had his guy beat by just enough that I'm not going to say he beat him off or anything. Sorry, these are not aid. This is not aid material. Anyway. But so yeah, he got the ball to him in the end zone, and good to see Chisholm. People have been talking about, that this guy has a lot of spunk. I'm still gonna try here. These are all weak, but and there people have been clamoring to see him more. He looked great in the preseason against lesser competition. So in the preseason he seemed like an exciting guy that was worth getting excited about. Maybe too excited, if you know what I'm saying. Have I done enough of this? This is still, am I going over the top with this? Anyway, so yeah, great to see him contribute. And you wonder if he'll continue to be a big part of the offense with Mac Hollins gone. It certainly seems like he would be. And pretty encouraging. I mean, it was against the Jets, so can you really get too excited about it? I don't know. We'll see what he does against the Dolphins. That'll be a real test. If Efton can really have another couple of good looking catches in that game, then we're gonna start. I'm gonna start thinking that he'll be valuable in the playoffs. But he's probably gonna have to show up against more than just the Jets. But I was happy for the guy. He's kind of been put in a workmanlike effort all year, sort of working in the background. Didn't do much as a kick returner. So I'm glad he doesn't do that anymore. But I think he is capable at getting open. People mentioned him like an Edelman type. Certainly would like to see that develop. With Hollins out, we need all the help we can get. So I think he showed that he's at least a potential piece that could be useful in the absence of Hollins at minimum. And so yeah, that was cool to see. Did want to mention that Farms play where Farms sacks the quarterback and they call it roughing the passer. I mean, I watched that. I saw nothing about that play that made it a roughing the passer play. I mean, they said that he like left his weight on him. I mean, he's sacking the guy. It wasn't like he like lied there on top of him like a beached whale for a minute. And it seemed like he tackled him and then he got off the guy, and somehow that was roughing the passer. I mean, these roughing the passer calls. I mean, last week was ridiculous enough. Now 2 weeks in a row. Now this roughing the passer call basically seemed like because he sacked the quarterback, it was roughing the passer. I mean, what kind of game are we watching? Like the officials, NFL is going to ruin football real quick if you can't sack the quarterback anymore, because that's still a play I think everyone appreciates, and made no sense to me. It's kind of a shame. Farms had a good play to break through. I was just talking in the preview show about how I liked the Farms was coming up, and I thought he could be useful, and he would have been useful on that play right there, but they just stole a sack from him because I guess he didn't help the guy up or something, or he didn't daintily, he didn't like push him lightly instead of landing on him. I mean, this is not NFL football if that's a roughing the passer. So just wanted to get that out of the way. Just an incredible game from Drake May. Keep seeing these amazing completion percentage numbers, and I've always been a big guy on completion percentage. I've always believed you need to have at least minimum 68% completion percentage with, kind of like career. Should be around the high, well, I wouldn't say 68, but, at least above 65 minimum if you're going to be any kind of a serious quarterback, and there's a lot more to it than just completion percentage. But I do think that, accuracy is one of the key components of being a good quarterback, and, that Drake May is able to keep his percentage in the low 70s is absolutely incredible. And today, 5 touchdowns in a little over a half. I mean, this is going to be a guy that we are going to have a good time watching for quite a long time, as long as he doesn't injure himself. We saw Brady put up those kind of numbers occasionally, but it's happened an awful lot already with Drake May. I'm not obviously trying to compare Drake May to Tom Brady, who's still obviously always going to be the greatest quarterback of all time, as far as I'm concerned. But how spoiled are we? Just how spoiled are we? We have a kid that's capable of putting up those kind of numbers. Just a perfect, efficient game. I mean, if Drake May had any kind of real big names to throw to as far as wide receivers, like premier guys, then we'd see. I think he could have easily eclipsed Stafford's numbers for the year. I think Stafford. I'll be happy if Stafford wins the MVP. I don't, as I mentioned in a previous video, I don't really care that much about individual accolades. So if like May will have plenty of chances to win MVP. I don't think Stafford's ever won the MVP, as far as I know. So if he needs to get his first one, that's probably good. I think Stafford's an asshole based on that whole incident where the reporter fell and he didn't lift a finger. He just kind of laughed at her. I think he laughed at her and turned away, and it was just kind of like that was not a class move. So I think Matt Stafford's a dick, honestly. Uh, but and May is probably a nicer guy than Stafford is. But I guess Stafford can have the MVP. You look at the 40 touchdowns to 5 interceptions for Stafford. It's like, how can you argue with that, really? You could make a case for whether or not Stafford or May is more valuable to the team. I think they're pretty equally valuable. We had May last year and we had May this year, and that wasn't the only difference in the team. Obviously, Vrabel and the coaching. May made a huge step forward, so obviously his step forward is a huge part of why the team is so good. But it's not just him, and I mean, both the Pats and the Rams would be absolutely devastated if either of our quarterbacks were gone. So I think they're both equally valuable. In that case, you just have to look at kind of like you have to look at the stats, and the stats to me say even though Drake may has passed for a little bit more yards, the touchdown to interception ratio 40-5 versus 30-8. I mean that's significant enough. 40 touchdowns is a lot of touchdowns. I give the nod to Stafford. I have no problem with Stafford being the MVP. That's the last thing. I don't even want to talk about that anymore. I think Stafford will leave little doubt of it next week, or sorry, tomorrow against the Falcons. I think he'll carve them up and sort of solidify his position. Um, and yeah, I think Drake will probably play pretty well against the Dolphins, but I have a hard time seeing even with today it took 5 touchdowns for him to get to 40-30 in the touchdown count. So that was with 5 touchdowns today. So I think Stafford's got this pretty well wrapped up, and I don't really have a problem with it. Let's see. Is there anything else I can talk about for today? Glad to see. Most important thing about today was no one got injured. It kept whole sort of any time there was any tackle at all, I was sort of wincing, being like, "Is there a chance that somebody's hurt here?" And no injuries whatsoever in this game. Maybe that's a result of the fact that it looked like the Jets had basically given up on the game after the first couple of touchdowns were scored. Regardless, good that they were able to get May out after that first touchdown in the third. And, Dobbs didn't look all that great. If we ever have to rely on Dobbs for anything other than, part of a drive, the way he came in Cincinnati, he actually had that one drive in Cincinnati where he kept the drive alive and May came back from his, I guess, they thought at the time was a concussion. So Dobbs has shown that he's capable of being decent enough for maybe if May has to go out for a series, then Dobbs can get a first down. But that's about the most we could hope out of him. I'd rather be seeing Tommy Cutlets out there just because I like the name Tommy Cutlets, and people talk about how Dobbs throws the hospital balls, which is always a little nerve wracking. But he didn't throw any hospital balls. And the Pats were able to get away with him out there and with an entire defense of backups. And in that way, it was also good to see the defensive backups, get a chance. This Muma guy played. I got to see some Schooler on defense late. More Farms. Guys you didn't hear their names. Braden Swinson was out there. Swinson, I forget. I think it's Swinson. Didn't see anything from Braden. Sadly, I would have liked to have seen him, get a sack or something, or a backfield tackle. Still waiting on, they talked about how Braden was. I don't want to say. That's it. I gotta find out what his name is. At some point, I'm gonna have to get his name right. Braden. Let's see. It's Swinson. Okay, not Swinton. Swinson. So there we go. Clear that up for you guys, in case you had any question about it. Swinson, not Swinton. So yeah, no sacks for Braden Swinson. Uh, you know, reading the draft profiles of that guy, he was highly sort of seen as a sort of a draft steal. I know he played well on the practice squad, and that's why they brought him up to the roster. They put him on the roster because they were afraid he was going to get poached. He and Farmer were kind of like, Farmer, as we know. I didn't mention Farmer in the preview. Unfortunately, Farmer is not going to be with the team for the rest of the year. It sounds like put on IR. I don't know. Maybe he comes back for the Super Bowl or something like that. Doesn't seem like he was making much of an impact this year. It seemed like he was doing fairly well enough that he was getting some reasonably decent amount of playing time, but it wasn't like he was distinguishing himself. I don't know if he even has a sack this year. Losing him is unfortunate because it would have been fun to see him do something in the playoffs, but it's pretty clear that he's not a crucial element of the team at this point. So, sorry, we'll see if Farmer turns into anything in the coming years, and Swinson, I guess he's well regarded, but so far nothing from him. So maybe we'll see those two guys become more of a factor in coming seasons. But it seems as if this year they're an afterthought. Um, is there anything else I can talk about in this game? Thought it was weird that they were aggressive on fourth down twice. I guess maybe that might have been because Vrabel knew about the team's tendency to let their foot off the gas pedal. I think at that point they'd already had I don't know if they were up 28-3 at that point or if it was 21-3. I forget. But it may have been just a situation where Vrabel didn't want them to take the foot off the gas pedal, so he had them go for it because he knew that the Jets weren't trying very hard, and he didn't want them to get into a game where they were only kicking a field goal and gave the Jets any hope at all. Though it really didn't seem as if the Jets had any ideas about winning that game whatsoever. I do think that I don't want to see him go for those kinds of calls in the playoffs. I hope that he decides to take the points on fourth and short in some of those situations. Generally, I know that the new thought about it is that you're better off going for it than kicking field goals. But there was that guy, who was his name? I think his name was the former um, Chargers coach who went by that philosophy every time, and it never seemed to work out. And I don't know. I like to see. I'm not as wild. I believe in going for it if you're on your opponent's side of the field, and it's in sort of a situation where you're down by more than a touchdown, and you really need to get back into the game. I always believe in going for it then. But once you get to a point where you're kind of down a touchdown or less, depending on how much time is left in the game, the field goal I think is a good choice. So I'm sure that those decisions today were mostly as a result of playing the Jets, who looked highly unmotivated in a game that maybe they just wanted to get the team some fourth down experience, give them some confidence in fourth and short situations. But yeah, I hope we don't see a lot of that in the playoffs, because if you do that against the playoff teams and you don't convert, you got serious problems. Another thing I wanted to mention was they cut it again. We had a fourth and short situation down by the goal line, and when they try to, they seems like they keep wanting to believe that our offensive line can make a hole and that they can run it through the pile. And every time it's I forget who it was. It was either Ramondre or Travion got stopped behind the line. Just does not seem like we're going to be capable of punching those third and fourth and shorts in with our running game. It just doesn't look like our offensive line has the muscle to force those holes to open. Unless, of course, it's for Chisholm. I'm sorry, Chisholm. Oh, my God. I wasn't supposed to go that dirty, and I accidentally had the Freudian slip there. Anyway, let's just stop talking about after Chisholm. So, yeah. But seriously, though, in the end, they schemed a play that was a throw. I worry that in the playoffs, people will be aware of the Pats' inability to run on third and short, and they will be looking for pass plays. So McDaniels is going to have to continue to be very creative about how to convert on those third and fourth and shorts, which is concerning. I think it's definitely something to be aware of going into the playoffs. But hopefully he'll be able to keep coming up with creative ways to getting the ball into the end zone, or getting first downs in those types of situations, because I really don't want to see them continue trying to run the ball with it. It just doesn't seem like it works. We just do not make holes for our guys, and they usually get stopped behind the line. So let's see less of the attempted power runs up the middle on third and fourth and short. That would be my request. If anyone in the Patriots world is listening, which they're probably not, mostly I'm the only one listening to these videos, but anyway. Let's see, was there anything else? I guess that's pretty much it. Oh, yeah, Borregales. I'll say, about Borregales. He chooses the right time to miss them, Every field goal he's missed this year has been in a situation where it was kind of it wasn't a can't miss type of situation. It was a situation where we could afford to have the miss. Obviously, we're up 42 to 3. He missed then. There was never a time where you needed the field goal less than that. I don't know if it's something that should carry any concern going into the playoffs. I don't think so. I think every kicker especially a rookie, is going to miss some kicks, and I certainly am pretty happy with, if it's kind of a law of averages thing. If he's going to have to miss some kicks, better that he misses them. I mean, few people are perfect, so at some point you're going to have to miss some kicks, and I'm happy with him missing kicks when they're completely unnecessary. There was that Jets game where he missed that field goal. It was like something, maybe it's just something about playing the Jets. He missed another field goal against the Jets in that game earlier in the year, and that was a bigger one. But even then, we had the game pretty well in hand in that first Jets game. It felt like, anyway, going into halftime. The game got tighter in the second half. But don't like seeing Borregales miss, but I think he's, on the whole, you can't really complain too much. He's been a great kicker all year. I still have faith in him to put it through the uprights when it matters most. So let's hope that doesn't rattle him at all. And yeah, the game was never in doubt. Fun game to watch. At least for the first half, got to be real boring. It was just like both teams were trying to kill the clock as fast as possible in the second. So hardly even worth watching. I was sort of bleeding over to that after near the end. I didn't watch the backups that much because I was watching Pittsburgh absolutely blow their game against Cleveland. But I'll talk about that in the league review. I'm not going to talk about that now. But now I want to get into what all this means. So people were saying before the game, well, Pats would have a chance to clinch the East if the Bills lose to Philadelphia. And I'll tell you, I did not want to see that happen. I did not want to see that happen. There's two reasons why. Number one, if the Pats don't win this year, I've said this before, I'd like to see the Bills win. I know the Bills fans can be a pain in the ass. There's a couple of Bills trolls on the Pats Pulpit website that completely obnoxious. Zero Blitz, that's the name of the guy. If this guy hears it, you're a clown. Zero Blitz, you're an idiot. You're obviously a Bills fan. There's also a Jets fan that goes by Dumpster Fire Gillette, who's so clearly a troll. Sometimes they try to pretend like they're fans of the team. We know who you are. You're a joke. You waste your time going to other people. I mean, the people who are pathetic enough to waste their time going to other people's fan sites and talking trash and being trolls are people that I'm not saying that my life is so great, but these people somehow manage to be more pathetic than I am. So if you're wasting your time going to other fan sites, forums, and talking shit, you are a truly low individual, and you don't have much going for you in this life, let me tell you. But anyway, aside from that, a lot of people wanted the bragging rights. I think some people were worried that maybe there was a chance we'd lose to the Dolphins and that something would happen and we wouldn't take the AFC East. I never had any doubts. I never really had any doubts personally. I always assumed that the Pats would beat the Jets and the Dolphins and would clinch the East. The biggest reason why, but there were two, like I said, one of the reasons why I didn't want the Bills to lose because I had faith in the Pats to win the division without the Bills losing, and I really wanted the best possible situation for the Bills because I have friends and family who are hardcore Bills fans. I feel really bad for them. They've spent. I mean, my sister is one of them, and the only reason why she's a Bills fan is because her fiance is a lifetime Bills fan. So for her, I don't think she even really cares that much. But for her happiness, I hope that the Bills at least don't totally stink. And I would have liked to have seen the Bills win a Super Bowl for her and her boyfriend, and for my other buddy who I play cards with. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen now. In my mind, obviously, I was always going to pull for if it came down to Pats Bills. Of course, I'm going to pull for the Pats ahead of the Bills. I was going to take a lot of crap from my sister and my friends if the Pats were eliminated by the Bills. I already took a lot of crap from them when the Bills had that comeback win. So. But even though they give you crap, that it's a tough world they're living in. To be a fan of a team for that long, to see them go to 4 Super Bowls and fail every time, I feel for the Bills fans. I do. I can't help it. They're a good fan base. Josh Allen's a cool guy. People living in Buffalo don't have a lot else to get excited about because Buffalo is just a piece of crap town. I'm sorry if you live in Buffalo. I mean, maybe it's better than I think it is, but I don't think so. I know what the area by the lakes in New York looks like. It's not a place that anyone wants to live. It seems like a place where you end up living just because of sort of tradition or history or whatever circumstance. But I wanted there to be a chance for the Bills if the Pats didn't. I would have liked to have seen the Bills come out of the AFC if it wasn't the Pats. And the Bills losing this game makes it the path for them is extremely narrow at this point. I have a hard time. If the Bills were playing home games, they'd have a shot. But now they're going to be on the road, and we know the Bills stink on the road. It certainly helps the Pats' chances. If the Bills have to play on the road, and that's good. Even though the Bills have shown they can beat the Pats at home. But I feel for Bills fans, and on the other side of it, it's nice that we're back. It's nice that we're back in top of the AFC East. It really is. It wasn't like I had any qualms about wanting the Pats. I didn't want the Bills to beat the Pats in the AFC East, so don't get me wrong here. I don't think I'm that much of a, that I care that much about my friends that I don't want to see my team, dominate. We won the AFC East. It's exciting. First time since 2019. It shows that at the very least this year we're back and we will be a factor. I don't know if we'll be as dominant this year in the coming years. I think a lot of people are jumping the gun. You hear the call-in shows and people talk about, oh yeah, we'll be a great team for the next 10 years. Well, with Drake May, yeah, we'll probably will be a contender for the next 10 years. To say that we're going to automatically win the AFC East, well, maybe if the Bills don't get rid of McDermott, I think McDermott is not the guy for them. By the time they lost to Kansas City for the second time in the playoffs, I knew he didn't seem like a guy who could get them over the hump. And the Bills have only gotten less talented in terms of their roster from there. I mean, I almost feel like maybe McDermott could do it if he had a better GM that actually knew how to evaluate talent. But you look at the Bills draft picks, and they just don't have a lot of big names on their team. They tend to rely on signing these older free agents. This is not a winning formula for any sport. You don't build your team by signing aging free agents. That's just not a way to win. I mean, to some extent, that's what the Pats did with Spillane and Landry, but it was more of a sort of a switch the culture, turn the team around. It wasn't meant to be the final pieces. This was the beginning of a rebuild. You can get away with that if you're at the beginning of the rebuild, but the Bills are going out and signing Joey Bosa and re-signing Tre'Davious White and safeties that should be close to retirement age. It's like it seems like they just don't draft talent. They don't draft guys who pan out and become names. So they're always drafting guys who end up being okay, pretty good, nothing to write home about. And their whole roster ends up being meh. And I don't know if that's McDermott's fault or the GM's fault or both of their fault. But the Bills missed their window, and it's sad for Bills fans. It really is. 5 years of dominating the AFC East and nothing to show for it. No title. I'm actually kind of pissed that they couldn't have knocked off the Chiefs one of those years. I really was hoping that they would beat the Chiefs one of those years, and couldn't do us any favors. Couldn't keep the Chiefs from making a lot of noise and having to listen to obnoxious Chiefs fans say that the Chiefs dynasty was going to eclipse the Pats dynasty. If the Bills had won just one of those AFC championship games, then we'd have to hear a lot less of that crap. But in that way, the Bills annoy me. They should have taken their chance by now, and they should have gotten that poor fan base a championship, and they've blown it. Now the window certainly is looking a lot more closed. So that was the first side of it, was that for the sake of my sister and my friends, I wanted to see the Bills be the next best option for the AFC after the Pats. I still believe that the Pats would win the AFC even without the Bills. I thought the Bills would win out, and I thought we would win out, and because most importantly, and this brings us to number two, the seeding was perfect. If we win out and the Bills win out, the seeding was perfect, and now it's not. I've tried to tell this. I made this point on Pat's pulpit. Said, the reason what's going to happen now is we're going to have to face the Texans, and that was really, I feel bad for my Bills friends and family, but the bigger issue was that the seating was perfect as it was, and now it's all thrown into disarray, and this is the issue. We very well. I'm trying. I don't want to be too negative. I believe in the Pats. I think we're going to be a contending team. I think we can beat anybody on a given day, but the path, a little luck doesn't hurt. There's this attitude amongst a lot of Pats fans. It's like, oh, we're, whatever. We take on all comers. It doesn't matter if you really believe in the team. We can beat anybody, And I'm sorry, but I think that's just living in a fantasy world. You want to live in a world where, it's nice to live in a world where you have, it's like there's this idea in our society that if you have a delusional self-belief that's all you really need, that if you don't believe it, it doesn't happen. But I'm of the belief that, your success a lot of times depends a lot more on circumstances than how much you believe in yourself or your team or whatever. And, history shows that finishing with the 1 seed or having home field advantage, is a huge boon to the team. But, I think history would also show that a lot of teams that make it through the Super Bowl were lucky to have another team knock off a dangerous team or two in those same playoffs so that they don't have to face them, I remember, there have been times in the past where, a team doesn't match up well against another team, and fortunately for you, they end up playing a different team in the playoffs before they can get to you, and that team matches up better with that team, and the team that would normally be a problem for you gets taken out by a team that matches up better with that team, another playoff team, it's like people act as if these things don't matter, I'm sorry. I don't care if some people might say, well, if you don't beat the best, well, what good is it? Well, I'm sorry. A Super Bowl is a Super Bowl. It doesn't matter how you get there, If you're lucky, and you take that luck, I don't have to believe that the Patriots are the best team that win the Super Bowl. When the Patriots win the Super Bowl, I'm happy. If there's some doubt, this year all the teams are so close. Of course, there's going to be some doubt. Even if the Patriots did win the Super Bowl, there'd be some doubt that they were the best team. There's always doubt that the team that wins the World Series isn't always the best team. Teams that wins the NBA Finals isn't always the best team. You go through some trials and tribulations, but a lot of it depends on who's hot and at the time and circumstances surrounding matchups. Which matchups are favorable, which matchups can you avoid, and Pats fans like to act like, oh, we can beat anybody, this isn't going to be a problem, it doesn't matter who we face, why'd be afraid, just take on whoever, let the chips fall as they may, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the end, I guess that's where you go, but I'm sorry, rooting for the Bills in that game was a mistake, and the path to the Super Bowl just got a lot harder after that Bills loss. I really would have, I think it would have, our path to the Super Bowl would have been much easier had we beaten the Dolphins next week and the Bills won out their last games. And in some ways it would have been more rewarding, I think the other part of this that was downer was that, the Pats won while they were in the bus on the road, So you don't get to watch the whole thing, you don't get to see, the speech sort of came after the fact. Now it's like Vrabel had already given a post-game speech. Now he's giving a post-game speech after they get off the bus, which feels kind of awkward. The players are already kind of out of game mode, and suddenly it's like the game is over again. The fans don't get to cheer. You don't get to put on the shirts and the T-shirts and the hats and the whole deal. And, the whole thing just kind of ends up being awkward. It's like, in a way, it kind of feels like, if you win, they could have done it against the Bills in that game. They didn't do it. You can forgive them for not beating the Bills in that game. but not having that direct sort of win, you know, hat and T-shirt moment. I think on some level that hurts the team. I think you want to feel like that you didn't back into it. That you deserved it. That you won out. They'd won against Miami, and the Bills had won their team. I think they feel an even greater sense of pride because they knew that that the Bills gave them all they could handle, and they still pulled it off. Now it kind of feels like, well, the Bills kind of handed it to you a little bit. I don't think that matters as much, honestly, but it's just it's harder to savor that moment, after the fact. So I think that the way it happened was kind of lame, and I think the seeding, is not good because here's how it's going to work. Previously you had the Bills uh, in the 5 spot taking on either the Steelers or the Ravens. I'm just going to say the Ravens because I think the Steelers lost any realistic chance of making it to the playoffs. They don't have DK Metcalf, and they're going to have to go up against the Ravens, who, were given life when it seemed like their season was over. And it looks like they might even get Lamar Jackson back. So I'm just going to say the Ravens because I have a hard time seeing the Steelers winning after that debacle against Cleveland. They're not going to have DJ Metcalf. I'll get into that in the league preview. But what you're going to have is instead of the Bills facing, I was fine with the Bills facing the Ravens. I think Bills Ravens would have been maybe something of a tough game. The Ravens gave it to them pretty good early in the year. Probably not that tough. I don't think the Bills are really even that great, honestly. I mean, today they didn't look all that great. I think the Ravens Bills probably would have been something of a game. I think the Bills would have won, but most importantly, you would have had the Texans going against the Jaguars, and those are two good teams. Some people, I think Cowherd thinks that the Jaguars is better than the Pats. I don't think the Jaguars are better than the Pats. The Texans, on the other hand, while the Pats I think could beat the Texans, whereas I think that maybe the Pats beat the Jaguars 7 out of 10 times. I think the Pats beat the Texans, 5 out of 10 times. Like that's where I think that the Texans were talking pretty even matchup for the Pats, given the way they've been playing, given the strength of their defense. I think a lot of analysts think of as the Texans as being the best team in the AFC. And the way I see it, there are 3 teams to really be afraid of in the AFC. I'm not that afraid of the Jaguars. Maybe I should be, but the way I see it, the Jaguars don't really do anything well. They've got a pretty good defense. Their offense is, decent enough. Trevor Lawrence starting to finally look like maybe he's, an actual legit starter. Not like Drake May level, obviously, not Josh Allen level, not any of this. He's not in the top tier. He's probably not even in the second tier of quarterbacks. He's probably not even a CJ Stroud level quarterback, but he's close to CJ Stroud. He's getting to the lower end of CJ Stroud. So, I don't see how anyone could be afraid of the Jaguars. If there's any reason to be afraid of the Jaguars, it's because they've won a bunch of games in a row. But I don't see that as being enough of a reason to be particularly intimidated. I think the Pats can beat the Jaguars. But you look at the triumvirate of teams that are scary to me, and it's the Texans, the Broncos, and the Bills. I was more afraid of the Bills until they lost that game against Philadelphia. Now I'm not so afraid. I think the only reason why I was afraid of the Bills was because we have that record of them owning us. You wonder if McDermott has some way of stymieing May that he's not going to be able to figure out. And obviously Josh Allen being the best quarterback is always something of a threat. As long as if he's on his game, he's hard to stop. I probably would say I'm more afraid of the Bills than the Jaguars, and I think a lot of people wouldn't say that. But the Bills and the Jaguars pretty close there. I'd say they're about the same level of challenge, for the most part. Maybe the Bills are a little more challenging. But, Denver is a step above that because you're talking about lockdown corner Pat Surtain. You're talking about a coach, Sean Payton, a lot of years of experience, and a guy who has a proven track record of at least, some amount of success. He only has 1 Super Bowl, but, widely regarded as a good coach. A lot of winning seasons for New Orleans. Has won in the playoffs before. Should have gone against the Pats in 2018 and got screwed by the refs. You got to take Peyton seriously. A great pass rush in Denver, even if it's not quite as good as the Texans pass rush. They're playing their home games in thin air, which is one of the big ones. Always that we know we've seen the Pats' playoff hopes go to die in Denver on more than one occasion during the dynasty years. Don't have to relive that. And even though Nix is not the most skilled quarterback in the world, not the scariest quarterback in the world, he does have that fourth quarter comeback ability, which is something that we feel like we'd be better off not dealing with. I'm not saying I don't think the Broncos are beatable. They are, but with all those factors, to me, the Broncos, and with their record being what it is, and we should have learned our lesson. Other people, were trying to say that because our strength of schedule was so weak that our record didn't mean anything. But if we're going to tell people that that's not true and that beating bad teams matters, well then you're going to have to think that about the Broncos too. We can't be the pot calling the kettle black. So Denver's a step above the Bills and the Jaguars, and then the Texans, I think, are the team that scares me the most in the AFC because while the Broncos have a very good defense and a huge home field advantage, the Texans have what a lot of Super Bowl contending teams have, which is the best defense. Probably the best defense in the NFL, the Texans. Two great pass rushers that could make May's life difficult. I know May is good against pressure, but he was pressured 44% in that Ravens game, and it took a great game from him. He was on in that game. It took a great fourth quarter for him to be able to. It was a game where obviously that game against the Ravens was in doubt, and we knew May was able to turn on in that game. We don't know if he'll be able to turn on against the Texans. It's one thing to turn it on against he was able to turn on against a Ravens team that isn't playing defense like it has in years past. Whereas the Texans, can May turn it on against a team with a defensive backfield that's that talented? I don't know. We don't know yet. He wasn't able to do it against the Bills, and there's also some risk that the Texans will be able to shut down our running offense, and that sort of makes it even harder for Drake May because then it becomes a one-dimensional offense like it was in Baltimore where he's throwing all the time, but instead of going against the Ravens defense, he's going against the Texans, probably top-ranked defense in the league. I did want to check. Let me take a look real quick and see how good SPN team stats. I want to see how good the run defense is for the Texans. So let's see. Let's go to defense here. Texans. Look at that. Total yards a game. They are the best defense by yards a game. Let's see about points. By points a game, yes, they are the best defense by points a game. Let's take a look at rushing yards a game. Okay, fourth best. Not too shabby. The Broncos actually better than they are. Second overall in average rushing yards a game. 89.7 for the Broncos. Only 94.8 for the Texans. Scary. How about passing defense? Funnily enough, the Bills number one passing defense in yards per game, which part of the reason probably why Drake May struggled so much. But there again, you have the Texans number 4, not far back. I mean, across the board, there's no question that their defense is stout. Strong in every sector. Broncos, meanwhile, another 4, 5, 6, 7. They're 8th overall passing yards. So the Broncos also scary in the passing defense. But you hear what I'm saying here, people? you got all these overconfident people in the comments saying, "Oh yeah, whatever. The Pats can take the Texans." Why do you want to face the Texans if you don't have to face the Texans? It could be a matchup issue. They shut down our run and may have to throw under heavy pressure from two great pass rushers. They probably don't even have to. With those two great pass rushers, they probably don't even have to blitz necessarily. They could send those two pass rushers, and the Texans' defensive backfield is so good that chances are they can get pressure on May even without having to commit to the blitz, which he does play well against. And I know people say, well, the Texans' offense is nothing to write home about, and it isn't. C.J. Stroud is not scary in the same way that Josh Allen or Mahomes or Burrow or Herbert, even Herbert is. But he's really, he's not far down from the first tier. He's in the second tier. He's a second tier quarterback. And they have some players on offense, some young guys who are just sort of developing and starting to step into their stride. They don't have a great running game necessarily, but if you're acting like if you're overconfident because the Pats wallop the Jets and you think that we can just, tear through anybody, including the Texans, I'm sorry, you're just being irrational. And I don't know. I said that the Pats would struggle against the Jets today, so maybe I'm wrong. I'm not trying to say I know this. All I know is the Texans. A lot of people think the Texans are the scariest team in the AFC. That they could easily represent the AFC in the Super Bowl, and I believe that. And why face them if you don't have to? So we were looking at a situation where we had the Texans at 6, the Jaguars at 3. If they just won out, if the standings seating had stayed static, we would have had a pretty ideal situation. One of the Jaguars or Texans would be gone. Bills would play the Ravens, and we would play the Chargers. We were going to play the Chargers either way, as long as from what I hear, chances of the Chargers beating the Broncos very slim because now they're talking about resting Herbert. That's certainly no fun. They're going to rest the guy so that he can come back and try to beat us. I don't think even this game against the Chargers is not going to be a picnic with Harbaugh on the other side and Herbert. I mean, if this were the Chargers with their full offensive line, we'd be in trouble in that game. It wouldn't be an easy game. The Chargers would be as good as any team in the AFC if they'd still had their left and right tackles healthy from earlier in the year. Fortunately for us, they don't. I think that's the Achilles heel, and we were kind of not in a great place to take advantage of that Achilles heel because our pass rush isn't great. But hopefully, by the time we're playing the Chargers, there's a chance that Landry is at least coming back and playing at 70%. There's no sign of Spillane coming back whatsoever. You'd hope that somehow he comes back for the playoffs. And Nelson Williams will definitely be active by then. Maybe we'll have Farms still. Farms will get to the quarterback a little bit, but even the Chargers game is not going to be easy. Before you even think about the Texans, and I loved the idea of the Chargers, or sorry, the Texans or the Jaguars losing in that first round, and now we don't have that. We've got, in all likelihood, because the Texans have the tiebreaker with the Bills. One of two things is going to happen. We're either going to face the Chargers in round 1, or we're going to have a first round bye. And in all likelihood, we're facing the Chargers. People talk about how we might face the Bills. I don't think that's happening. Chances are good. I don't even see how you would face the Bills. I think if the Bills and the Chargers lost, I believe I thought that let's see. Let me take a quick look at that. Actually, was there a chance that could happen? Oh, that's right. The Bills are playing. I forgot. I'm not even going to entertain the idea that the Bills will lose because they're playing against the Jets. We know what the Jets look like. I think there was the thing if the Bills and the Chargers lost, that we'd face the Bills in round 1, and I'm not even going to entertain that possibility because the Bills don't want to fall any farther in seeding. I don't think. I mean, they could. I don't think the Bills have enough injuries that they need to rest their guys. I don't think the Bills particularly want to play the Pats either. Um, you know, of course, then again, they don't want to play the Chargers for that matter, but I don't see them, throwing in the towel against the Jets and trying to rest all their players. Even if the Bills rested all their players, they'd still have a hard time losing to the Jets, I think. And I don't think the Bills are out to play the Pats specifically. I think they'd be just as happy playing the Jags. So I think the Bills will probably put forth a normal effort and win. And in all likelihood, we'll either be playing the Chargers or we'll have a first round bye. And it's looking more like we're going to be playing the Chargers because I don't see the Chargers winning against Denver without Herbert playing. It's true that they're sitting Herbert, then Chargers have zero chance of beating the Broncos, who will be motivated to win the last game to get the number 1 seed. So then you end up with a situation where the most likely thing is we play the Chargers. Going to be a tough game. I think we can win that one. We'll see. It's not going to be easy. And now we're looking at the Texans playing Baltimore. Now, maybe Baltimore can give the Texans a little bit of a problem, but given the way Lamar Jackson has played this year, probably not. I'm going to assume the Texans win that game. You never know. It just seems like Lamar Jackson's got, unless he, recovers significantly and looks like a different player in that game against the Texans, chances are pretty good Texans are going to win. So let's say Texans beat Baltimore as expected. The other game becomes Jacksonville Bills. Now, I think the Bills could beat Jacksonville, and it's nice that Jacksonville is gotten rid of. So let's look at the first time. If the Bills beat Jacksonville, then the Bills are the 6th seed. Jacksonville's the 3 seed. That would mean that we face the Texans immediately. The Texans being the 5 seed. I'm assuming also that Jacksonville is going to win tomorrow. Win their last game against the Titans. We're talking about the Titans here. Jacksonville is not going to want to lose their 3 seed. I don't think. And I don't think Jacksonville has any guys. I think Jacksonville will be motivated to keep their seeding as is. So I think they will play hard against the Titans and win that game. I'd be very surprised if the Titans gave the Jaguars a game in the final game of the season. Which means, if the Jaguars play the Bills and the Bills do win, I would expect the Bills to win. It wouldn't be an easy game. It would be in Jacksonville. I don't know. Really, that could be a close game. But we'll go over each. So let's say the Bills win. Denver plays the Bills, and we play the Texans. Immediately, our second round matchup is against the Texans. That to me is like worst case scenario. You want to avoid the Texans if possible. So let's just say that's not working out too well. The other way around, Jaguars beat the Bills. Then we're looking at playing the Jaguars while the Broncos play the Texans. Certainly I think that's the best possible scenario given the way things have panned out, but I just do not see that as a likely scenario, particularly. I mean, it's not that unlikely. I suppose, in that way we could play the Chargers, the Jaguars, and then the winner of Broncos-Texans. And at least that way, one of the Broncos or the Texans gets eliminated. So I suppose, we could do worse than that. But I much preferred the idea of either the Broncos or the Jaguars getting eliminated. Think about how it would have gone the other way. I know this gets really complicated with a lot of the what ifs, but let's say that it was the way it was originally, before the Bills lost to the Eagles. Would have been Texans Jags. One of those teams gets gone, and it would have been Bills Ravens. Let's say the Bills beat the Ravens, and let's say the Texans beat the Jags. That's what I would expect. I would expect the Texans to take it to the Jags. Then we're looking at, Denver versus the Texans, us versus the Bills. I will take the Bills over. The Bills look beatable. I would take the Bills over the Texans. The Bills basically have Josh Allen. We looked great against the Bills in that first half. We've beaten the Bills once this year. we're capable of beating the Bills. The Texans are an unknown and a scary unknown. We don't want to have to go down that road if we can help it. Imagine if the Texans had beaten the Jags and then took out the Broncos for us. That would have been a much more beautiful scenario. Then we're looking at only having to beat one of the three of the Jags, Texans, and Broncos. The scenario to me is a lot safer the other way. The path becomes narrower. Now, given the way things have panned out, we're going to need the Jaguars to beat the Bills. Meanwhile, on the other side of this means that my poor friends and family, the Bills have to make a first round exit. Even more depressing for them. It's just the way this works. We would go on to face the Jaguars, which is also not an easy game. I don't know. I just, I liked the idea of. I felt like the other way was an easier path. I could go into more. I'm just gonna wrap this up. At this point, it's just like just suffice it to say, you know, there's a good chance we face the Texans now. I think the best possibility is that we end up facing the Texans at this point. The Bills will have to go on the road to Jacksonville. They'll probably lose. And Texans will likely beat Baltimore, and that will mean we'll be facing the Texans in round two. The thing that seems to me like the most likely scenario. And if we end up getting beaten by the Texans in round two and lose out, don't say I didn't warn you. That's all I'm saying right now. Could have lived in a beautiful world where one of the Texans or the Broncos would have taken each other out. We're in a much more precarious situation now, I think. So there you have it. I don't mean to be a naysayer. I don't mean to be a negative Nelly about this stuff, a Debbie Downer. With the classic SNL bit. I'm excited we won the East. First time in 5 years, even if we had to back into it with the Bills' loss. I hope we still win. Obviously, we got this game coming up against Miami. They're going to have to win that to preserve seeding. I think things only get worse. We'd have to face the Ravens potentially if we become a wild card team if we lose that game. No, that's right. We can't become a wild card team because we have clinched the division. But the seeding would suffer. I think we probably fall to third, and I don't know. We don't get to play the Chargers if we drop another seed. So I think the Chargers are the worst of the AFC teams to face, even though that game will also be a challenge. I'd rather face the Chargers than the Bills or anybody else at this point. So we can't afford to lose another seed. I think it can only get worse from here as far as I think we have to win that Miami game. I think they'll be motivated to win. I think Vrabel will have the guys ready to go. And I'm happy we won the AFC East. It just is, I don't know. As a Pats fan, somebody who's watched the team win so many Super Bowls, what does winning the AFC East even mean? People, it's like, will it matter if we won the AFC East if we get booted in the second round? Or even the first round? It won't matter. It's like. After you've seen a team win six Super Bowls, to have them win the AFC East, it's nice. I'm proud of them. It's amazing. It's real. Honestly, it's just hard. My expectations have been changed. They came into the year hoping that they would make the playoffs at all. Well, how can after going, if they win the next game, will be 14-3. How can you not expect them to go to the Super Bowl at this point in a league where there's parity? At this point, just like Dave Portnoy has said on his channel, Super Bowl or bust. There's no glory in winning the AFC East at this point. It's weird that people are acting like there is. I mean, it helps to have home field advantage locked down. So, but you could say that, except for the fact that we're undefeated on the road this year. So really, how useful is the home field advantage really? I feel like this is a unique year where the team is so good on the road that the matchups matter more than home field advantage, and the goal as a Pats fan should be a Super Bowl. So I don't get all this rah rah noise being made. It's like people acting like, oh, we won the division, so we're superior to the Bills again, like it was during the dynasty years. This isn't the dynasty years. This team has a lot to prove. This team has never won a playoff game. That's the first challenge. They're untested. And I think a lot of people are just forgetting that. As good as the team looks, as good as May looks, as well balanced as we are compared to some of the other teams in the AFC that aren't so well balanced. This team is very green. This team is coming off a year this year was supposed to be a rebuilding year, and they've done a fantastic job rebuilding. I'm not trying to say I lack faith in the team. I think they can beat any team in the AFC, but why make it harder than it needs to be? A little luck doesn't hurt. And as far as I'm concerned, for me, a little luck would be not facing the Texans. I don't care if we win a Super Bowl without facing the Texans. As far as I'm concerned, that's just as good as winning a Super Bowl facing the Texans. No one can say we weren't champions. So, I hope for our sake we don't have to face the Texans. Because if we get knocked out by the Texans, don't say I didn't tell you so. Don't say I didn't warn you. But anyway, so that's about wraps it up. This went way longer than I thought. I really thought my review of the Jets was going to be short but sweet, and I realized that there was a lot of things still to talk about. Next week, I'll do a game preview. My guess is Milton Williams plays next week. My guess is Tonga probably will be out next week. See more of Chisholm next week. We'll have a healthier Pop Douglas, I hope. Doesn't seem like he got any more injured. Should be a fun game next week. I'm looking forward to it. A little bit more challenging. We've got Achane. I think getting Williams back would be huge for helping to stop Achane. Although without Spillane, I really doubt the run defense is going to be great. But let me save all that for the game preview. We'll know more by the time I do the game preview for that game. I'll have a better idea of how to address what's going to happen. But basically, looking forward to a strong finish to the season, and hoping for a miracle that the Chargers either decide to play Herbert or somehow pull off a unlikely win against the Broncos. Because obviously, all this crap I just spent 40 minutes talking about, or however long it was, last half an hour talking about, will mean absolutely nothing if the Pats can get the number one seed. I just have very little hope that that'll be what happens, because the Chargers just do not have a reason to care particularly about this last game. And from the rumors I'm hearing, they're going to be sitting a lot of their best players, which means we'll be getting the Chargers' best shot in the first round. But at the very least, we know it's good to be. I'm not going to say that I'm happy with the division win. But if you told me coming into this year that we would take the division over the Bills, of course I would have been overjoyed. We are back. Even if we don't win a Super Bowl, even if we are even one and done this year, clearly we're back on the scene. Drake May is going to be a problem for not just the AFC East, but the entire AFC for the foreseeable future. As long as they continue to do as well as they did building the team this year, if they add free agents signings as successful as the ones they added this year, and have a good draft the way they did last year, things are only looking up. So congrats to the Pats, AFC East champions, potentially a force to be reckoned with for the foreseeable future. And I'll see you later this week. I've wasted enough of your time today. Stay tuned for the Pats Dolphins preview, probably either Friday or Saturday. I should probably keep these times more regular, so then it'll be a little easier for you to know when they're going to be posted. But for now, great win versus the Jets. Encouraging. Certainly looks like the team is a force to be reckoned with. And let's get this win against Miami. We'll talk more about that later. But great win, and congrats to the Pats, AFC's champions, with more to come. We all hope.